Welcome to the Man Up God's Way podcast, a show that dives into the real, raw, and relevant issues for men and their faith, life, and community. Now, your host, Jody Burkeen.
Hey guys, Jody Burkeen here with the Man Up God's Way podcast, coming to you from the town of St. Louis, and we're excited today. We got a great guest, and before we get to our guest, I just want to get you guys to take an opportunity to share our podcast with all your friends and neighbors on social media. If you get an opportunity, help us reach more and more people. We currently have just shy of 1 million followers on social media, and our podcast is reaching tens of thousands each month, and we would love for you to help us reach more and more people. But today we've got a very special guest. I'm excited to introduce to you guys. Her name is Jenny Barber with Talitha Coffee, and we are excited to hear her story and hear her background of how Talitha became a business as well as a ministry. Jenny, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, good. I'm so glad to have you. It's been a few weeks trying to get your schedule squared away. I know you got a busy life, and how many kids do you have? Is it
I
6?
have 6,
Okay,
yeah, 6
6.
kids.
Okay, all right. I have 4, so I kind of feel your pain, but mine are broken up in we call it the 1.0 and the 2.0. So I have a 24 and a 23-year-old, and then twin 14-year-old. So
That's so fun. Yeah, we have the whole range going from 4 to 15 right now.
goodness gracious. Well, God bless you. I think that's awesome, especially in the world today that, you know, is it really about children? It doesn't seem like. So it's great to meet somebody who believes that the children are our future, believe it or not.
Absolutely.
Well, great. Well, Jenny, your team reached out to us a few months ago and asked if we could get you on the podcast and talked a little bit about the coffee. And we've had a couple of conference calls in between, and just really excited about the potential partnership, or the partnership that I think that we're going to have. Not only presenting, your business side of it, but also the ministry side of it, and what our audience can learn from it as well. And so before we get into all of that, we would love to hear your testimony, kind of how this ministry and this business all started, and, just your background. And I know our audience would love to hear it as well. So why don't you go ahead and share as long as you need to about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, my husband and I have been working in anti-trafficking for almost 15 years now. And so, for us, we've been a part of just about every phase in the anti-trafficking movement you can be. Prevention, awareness. We've done a lot of outreaches domestically and internationally, helped a lot of organizations really pioneer and get their outreaches up and off the ground. And then most recently, really just jumping into this area of creating business to bring hope to survivors. But for me, all of this really started from a place of passion. I was exposed to the issue of trafficking from a really young age. It was something just as the earliest memories I have, just really being born into a world that was affected by this, surrounded by a lot of addiction and violence and trafficking, exploitation in and out of the homes that I was living in as a young child. And the very first formative years of my life were really spent in that environment. And as you can imagine, that came with a lot of exploitation as a young child. Whenever those who are supposed to be watching you are, not in their right minds and they're using and abusing substances, it just puts such a vulnerability. So for me, the very beginning of my life being in those environments was really set off on that course of just having exploitation and abuse. I had a lot of people that from the very beginning, I knew that there were people praying for me. Even though I
Mm,
had no idea really who God was, I just knew, I knew my grandma was praying for me,
right.
even whenever she wasn't in proximity. And, yeah, so I think there were a lot of people that were in and out of my life in those first like 6 years. So I had these moments where people were touching my life that were like, "Hey, God has a plan for you," and saying things like this even from a young age. So it was such a mixed thing. On one hand, it's marked by like abuse and extreme, even as far as like torture and things like this, and people really gaining from that and using that to exploit. And then you have this flip side where you have sweet grandma and my Aunt Tammy who were like, "We're
Right.
praying for you and we're fighting for you. And there's a God that loves you and there's a purpose for your life." And so, yeah, that was just really kind of the starting off point. I remember as as early as like maybe 3 years old, actually sharing with a family member some of the things that were happening. I was one of those kids that had like a really sharp memory, and I was able to communicate from a very early age. So I began to share some of the things that were happening and that I was experiencing. And that family member was incredibly burdened. They had never heard anything like the things that I was telling them, and she at that moment was like, "I'm going to fight for this child. Like this is
Mm,
my fight." And so it started out, you had to be really gentle in how you approach the situation. So she reached out to my mother and said, "Hey, I would love to just create a safe home for Jenny. And so if you ever need a place for her to go, just know that my door's open." At that point, my mom had been pretty just really unpredictable in her behavior. And so, she'd meet somebody in the grocery store, and, they'd start talking about how she had a daughter, and they'd be like, "Well, if you ever need somebody to watch her, you can leave her with us. Like, we'd love to watch her," and things like that. And the next thing you know, I'd be dropped off in the middle of the night, early morning hours on their doorstep, and be
oh
told
my
to wait,
goodness.
like as a 4-year-old, like, "Hey, just wait until they wake up because they said they're going to watch you." And I never knew when she was coming back. And so that also put
Right.
me in a lot of really vulnerable and unsafe situations. I have memories as a young child of just really having to be hyper responsible. And so, I'd see the bills on
Mm,
the table and I'd walk them to the mailbox and things like that. I think that one of the things that is such a huge marker in my life is that when there's the promise that the Lord takes all of those broken pieces and that He redeems them, He does, and He's so faithful to do that.
mm,
And there's been such a journey for me of like overcoming some of those things that would make me hyper vigilant.
right.
And like, channeling, I'm like, "Hey, that was leadership development from a real young age," but that's how God does it. But yeah, so I ended up being adopted at 6 years old. And just right before my 6th birthday, my family actually went through. So that family member who had reached out to my mom and said she would love to create a safe home for me actually ended up in a very lengthy court battle. Her and her husband did, and eventually
Mm,
just became my parents. So we battled for a year in courts for them to gain custody of me, and they did right before my 6th birthday. And I remember having this moment of thinking, everything changes now. Like, I'm going to have the dream family. Like, I'm going to get to be a kid. Everything's going to be perfect from here on out. And I think the very first stretch did feel that way. It was
right.
magical. But I think that the enemy is so he's just not as slick as we'd like to think he is. He definitely had, God has a plan for our lives, so does the enemy, right? And
Right.
so those hooks were so deep
Mm,
in me. And I think I had been groomed from birth, right? So I had had these things that had been, physically, emotionally, mentally, just completely groomed into thinking, what was okay, what was not okay, what was safe, what was not safe, and all of these things. And so we ended up having somebody in our lives that my parents were just completely unaware of the situation. And it wasn't even that they were being negligent or anything like that. It was just one of those situations that you never think would happen. And we ended up having somebody who had proximity to our family exploiting me as a child, and, inviting me over for play dates with their kids, and everything seemed really fun and like happy, and oh, I found a best friend and all of that. But then it quickly turned into, now looking back on it, I recognize, like, when you go home, you're going to tell your parents that this, and this is what you did. And it started off with things where I was like, yeah, that is what we did. Like, of course. But then it started to change over time. And those things began to become skewed, where it was like, you're going to tell your parents you did this, and this. It was like two truths and a lie kind of thing. And I'd be like, well, why would I do that? And it was just like, oh, because sometimes parents get crazy and they worry and stuff. So we really want to make sure they think you had a great time. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't want to lose my friend, because they were also threatening, like, oh, maybe you wouldn't be allowed to play here anymore and things like that. And so, yeah, so definitely began to participate in that two truths and a lie kind of thing. And they began to groom me as well. And what ended up happening was they ended up filming content of abuse happening later on. And so this continued to spiral. We ended up moving and getting away from that situation. But I had this thing in me. I can never tell my parents what's happening. Like, I have to keep everything quiet, because the lie that was instilled in me was that this was going to destroy my parents. It was going to make them think that they weren't good parents. They had fought so hard for me and to get me out of dangerous situations, and maybe they wouldn't want me anymore. And so I dug a hole and I buried that reality so deep down. And I said, this is my secret. This is my burden. And that continued to happen, whether it was through people with proximity abusing or different things like that. So by the time I ended up a teenager, I was just, I was honestly a disaster. I had the lowest self-esteem. My family had moved again because they'd faced some like really tragic and crisis kind of moments as a family. And it led us to a small mountain town in Central California. And again, it was this opportunity of like, oh, maybe this is a fresh start. Maybe this is it. But I was so broken at that point. Like, I had these ideas of who I was. I had these ideas of what the world was and what people were, and they were deep. I began to have these ideas that perhaps my body and what I could offer the world was all that I had to offer. That like my personality, my leadership, my strength, my intelligence, like things like that really didn't necessarily matter. At this age, you boys also were starting to give attention and things like that. And so I found myself with a very, very deep and complex eating disorder. And at the age of 12, I really started to start sneaking alcohol and that type of thing. Just a deep, deep pit that I was in, making friends with not necessarily all the greatest people. But I had such a weird dynamic because I was dancing in both worlds. My family had gone to church, and I knew I had a reality of who God was. Like, I really did, because in those moments that were some of the darkest and scariest moments, right? Whether it was like being in a brothel as a child, or it was, just wondering where my mom was and when she was coming home for days on end, whatever, regardless of what it was, I would feel this presence with me. And I knew that I wasn't alone in some of those really, really dark and hopeless moments. So I had this knowledge that there was somebody that was looking out for me, that was greater than myself. And I'm hearing the Sunday school lessons, and I had heard everything. Like, before I was adopted, I had been a part of a church that had told me that because the sins of my mother, like those sins, like I would be held accountable for the sins of my mother, and Jesus wouldn't really
Oh
want
my
anything to do
gosh.
with me. all the way through to like nothing can separate us from the love of God, So I had all these messages, very, very messy. I was going to church and youth group, and there's actually a statistic that says that 55% of kids that are being trafficked and exploited are actually attending school while they're being exploited. And that
Mm.
was my reality. I had so much of this, like, don't ever tell anybody. Like, nobody can think that this is their fault. This is my fault. And so I
Wow.
would go to church, I'd go on youth trips and things like that. But it became really easy, whether it was, just to begin to allow myself to be used. This was also at the beginning of things like MySpace and stuff like that. And so the first time I was actually solicited was actually on social media, where I had somebody reach out to me and say, "Man, you're such a beautiful girl. Like, do you know that you could take pictures and you could make a lot of money?" And I was like, well, what's the harm in that? I was developing addiction at that point and things like this. And so it kind of allowed myself to get lured into that. Of course, never saw any money, but really began to get kind of lured in on that platform in that way. And then at the same time,
Wow.
as I'm falling deeper into addiction, I had some family members invite me to come have a sleepover at their house. And I remember, like, the whole family was like, yeah, these are people that we love and trust. Like, this is totally fine. But what ended up happening was that they took me to a place and allowed people to really begin to abuse and to take photographs and do all of this stuff for profit, and just end up exploiting me in that way as well. So this really continued on through my teenage years. Ended up falling into cocaine addiction really, really deeply, probably about like 17 years old. I also moved out of my house at that point. I remember my parents were fighting because I was causing some headaches in the home at that point. And my dad was like at the end of himself, because the only time like I would speak to him was just to be like, "I hate you, like, don't talk to me."
Mm.
And my mom was just emotionally destroyed, watching, like, having no idea. Like, there was nothing tangible. They couldn't see, like, what is happening with our kid, but they just knew that I wasn't sweet little Jenny anymore. And they felt like there was such a divide, and I was so full of attitude and, like, just
Right.
angry and broken. And ended up reaching this point where I saw this impacting my parents' marriage. And again, I had this deep belief that this is me, this is my burden to bear.
Mhm.
And so I actually told my parents, like, "Hey, I know, like, I'm causing tension. Don't worry, I'm gonna just leave. Like, you guys don't need to worry about me." So at 17 years old, I left home, and that's when things got really real in my life, because
Mhm.
I was essentially homeless and hopping from couch to couch and that type of thing, and doing what I needed to do to survive and have a place to stay. And ended up just falling into the party scene really deeply. Miraculously, like, when I say I have like some grit and some tenacity, all the while this is happening, I am working a job and I am going to high school, because I was like, I am gonna finish school, dang it. Like,
Right.
so I was like on it, and I was juggling this life, juggling like all the abuse, juggling, just addiction and all of these things. And so people were seeing me, right? I was out
Right.
in public. I was still, even every once in a while, I'd pop into church, and like we had people in our family that just really cared, and I knew they were praying. Again, so powerful. I think people often underestimate how powerful that is. And so
Right.
at I had youth pastors that'd be like, "Hey, we're leaving the door unlocked for you if you ever just need to pop in and take a shower or get something to eat. Anything in the home is open to you," and things like that, just really remaining available to me. And so that, I think, was really important, because even though I felt really alone, there were these moments where I knew that there were safety nets.
Right.
So finally, all of this addiction led me to a place of yeah, I had my drug dealer who was living a few towns over, ended up going to his house, and he was getting girls addicted to drugs and then turning them out on the streets. And this was several towns away from where I grew up. So nobody had any idea really that I was going there. A friend had taken me, and so it was so removed from everything, so isolated. And I remember them saying like that was the plan for me, like this was my plan. And I got an attitude one day with the drug dealer slash pimp, and just was like, he was like, you know what, I thought this was the plan for you, but I think I have a different plan for you. And I remember being like, I don't think I want to stay around and figure out what that plan is. But I had overdosed several times at that point, but I overdosed really badly that day. And they put me outside and just left me for dead. And somebody came up to me out of nowhere and walked up to me, lifted me up, and said, "You need to drink this cup of water right now." And so I did. I drank the cup of water. I came back up and was like aware, and they said, "You need to get out of here and never come back." And I said, okay. So I left and I went back to the place I was staying, came back to the girl I was living with, said, "Hey, my parents said you can't stay here anymore. You got to leave." So I left and I found myself alone in the middle of the woods in a cabin by myself, which was terrifying because
Oh
they
my
had taken
gosh.
all of my drugs, all of my money, everything. And I was there all by myself. And I was coming down off of all of these things completely alone, completely isolated. And I thought I was seeing things and hearing things and just absolutely paranoid, terrified out of my mind. And I cried out to God. And I said, "Hey, I know you're there." And I said, "If you get
Wow.
me through this night, I will serve you with the rest of my life." And I fell asleep. And I woke up the next morning and I called my mom and I said, "I don't know where I am. I'm in this general area and I need you to come find me." And she said, "No questions asked. I'm on my way." And so she
Wow.
came and somehow figured out where I was and picked me up. And I got in the car and she said, "I don't need to know anything." And I said, "That's good." um, that's
Oh
good,
my
Mom.
goodness.
And so we ended up driving, and I told her, I said, "Listen, I can't go to rehab because if I go to rehab, I'm only going to get worse." Because at that point, I was living this really reckless style where it was like anybody doing anything destructive around me almost became a challenge. I was like, I
Right.
could do that better, you know? And so I told her, I was like, that cannot be the type of inspiration that is in my life. And I was like, I need to kick this at home and then I need to find Jesus. And so
Wow.
she brought me home, and for a couple weeks, I just detoxed really hard in home, and she just cared for me while I did. And then I, kind of got on my feet and got a job, and I think it had been a matter of weeks, but I told her, I was like, I'm going to be a missionary because I told God that if He got me through that, I would serve Him with the rest of my life.
Praise
And so
God.
I signed
Amen.
up. I signed up for a missionary school, and yeah, I signed up for a missionary school. By the time I actually landed on the ground, I was still like dabbling with alcohol and things like that. I land on the ground and I go, and we're doing this whole thing of how I got here, kind of testimony night. And I share my testimony, and I just watch the staff, and they look pale. They're like, they said, "Wait, are you saying you've been clean for 2 months?" And I said, "Yes, I have." And they said, "Oh, we have a rule. You have to have been clean from drugs for like a year before you can apply to be a missionary here."
Oh my
And I was
goodness.
like, "Well, I was very honest on my application." And so they went back through and they looked at it and they're like, "Wow, all of us read this and all of us saw that it had been a year. So God definitely wants you here." But that was the moment where I encountered God. That was the place where I encountered God really for the
Mm.
first time. And it happened in this moment where somebody was praying for me and they said, "God's going to take you through a process where you go back through all of the darkest and hardest moments of your life, and He's going to show you exactly where He was. But there's a gift for you on the other side." And when that happened, I just started wailing. And we're not talking like tears, cute, crying. I mean, I was like
Right.
disgusting, ugly crying, wailing from the pit of my soul. And
Wow.
in it, it was like a movie was reeling in my head. And I was going back to moments where I was starving as a child, or moments when, grown adults were being sold in the room while I was sitting in the corner as a child, or,
Mm.
moments where I was being exploited or abused, and things like that. And in every moment, I saw Jesus right next to me, holding on to me so tightly. And I knew that I wasn't alone. And in
Wow.
those moments, everything that I was feeling, it was like he was demonstrating those same emotions. And I was
Mm.
like, wow, like this God gets me and he loves me. And then at the end of it, I like felt like this deep relief, and I felt like the Lord was challenging me, like, are you going to hold on to this pain, or are you going to let me in? And
Mm.
so I kind of battled for a moment. I was like, this is my pain. Like, what are
Right.
you talking about? Um, but I let him have it, and then I just started laughing. I just started laughing, and I felt so much relief. And then I went to bed that night, woke up the next morning, and came to my staff and my team, and I said, hey, I have this feeling, and I don't know how to explain it. But I was trying to articulate, and they just started crying. And they said, Jenny, you're
Mm.
feeling joy. And I was like, I've never felt
Right.
this in my entire life. So that was like really the beginning, the kickoff of what led me to this place. But
Wow.
my husband and I got married at 19, ended up doing a lot of anti-trafficking work, and then ended up, starting a lot of different initiatives. But it really was from this place of seeing that God can redeem even the most broken things and bring really beautiful things from them.
Praise God. So, how did you meet your husband?
My husband and I actually met when we were 13 years old at that
Okay.
youth group that I was attending, and we could not stand each other in the beginning. But we quickly became the best of friends, and we just, I don't know, stayed in touch, and like would write letters to each other, and it was really sweet friendship. And when we were 18, he actually looked at one of his friends and he said, I think I'm going to marry this girl. And
Mm.
I was away doing missions work, and he was writing me letters, and I came home, and he was just head over heels for me at that point. And so started dating and got married at 19.
Well, praise God. That is great. That is great. Okay, so let's go back to just a couple questions that I have here. Is there a relationship with your birth parents at all?
No,
To,
no.
okay.
Yeah, I think that was such a journey for me too. I think a lot of times people are like, "Hey, you work with like some of the most broken people. Like, has there been redemption in that area?" And I think it was somewhere along the line I really had to surrender and
Mm.
realize like this is not going to be something that is a healthy dynamic for me or for my family. And so unfortunately there isn't. My father is still a really unsafe individual, and
Right.
yeah, my mother's still just in a lot of brokenness, but she's working on rebuilding her life.
Well, good. All right. And so the adoptive parents, I mean, is there a
Yeah,
relationship there? Okay, good.
yeah, there
Good.
is. And they are like the most rock star grandparents you'll ever meet.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Yeah, all four of my children are adopted, and been blessed with that. So, saying the birth parents and they are your parents. I get it. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's
for sure.
sometimes it's like, yeah, they are the parents. But well, great, great. So you and your husband met 19, got married, and so what happened from there? Did you guys stay in missions? Did you just start,
Yeah.
living the life of a couple and trying to make ends meet? Did you have kids immediately? So what was that like?
Yeah, that's a whole another journey. But yeah, so we got married at 19 and moved up to Northern California, really just looking to figure out what is family supposed to look like. Neither of us really felt like we had a strong understanding of that. And so we moved to Northern California, where I had had some family, and plugged into a church right away. And I think one of our first services there, we heard the pastor highlighting this couple who had had just like a lot of really destruction in their life, and they were trying to, they were telling their story of how they had pursued finding family and figuring it out, and how they had this beautiful marriage on the other side. And we're like, oh, we're in the right place, we found it. And so from there, we just made really incredible friendships with people really showing us what it meant. So we actually struggled early on. I had multiple miscarriages and was told that I would never have children. But we miraculously did. I'm like, God loves to, prove people that anything's possible. So, yeah, we had a lot of loss along the way, but we ended up having 6 beautiful kids. And yeah, did college, but also jumped into nonprofit really early on. So I think it was 2010 we jumped into doing nonprofit work. That's where my husband saw trafficking for the first time. We were on an overseas trip and had been asked to help pioneer some outreaches in the red light district. And so he had no context. He had no idea what he was walking into. He had heard from me, this is a real issue and this is what exists. But he went into the red light districts for the first time, with the goal of like maybe reaching the men, and figuring out what does it look like for men to engage in this issue. And that's when he saw a young Thai girl sitting on an American man's lap, and he had a wedding ring on his finger. And he looked at me and he said, "This is an attack on family." And at that point, we had our very first daughter, and he was like, we have to give everything we have to fight this issue. And so we moved down to Los Angeles at that point, came home, moved down to Los Angeles, and were there for 12 years, pioneered outreaches on the streets, partnered and collaborated with other organizations, went into strip clubs, reached out to those in the porn industry. And yeah, that's really where the inspiration for Talitha came from, because we were doing these outreaches and we were watching women go through recovery programs that were incredible programs, and then come right back to us because they're like, listen, most of us have been here since we were teenagers. We're going through these programs, and then there's no opportunity because we have maybe didn't complete school, we have criminal records, or we have never had a professional job, things like that. And so my husband started roasting coffee in 2015 as a hobby, maybe 2014, but he started with the popcorn popper on our stovetop. And it was such a crazy moment because we're like, wait a second, this is really good. This just came from our stovetop and this is amazing. And at that point we were like, we were really big into, the popular coffee shops and had our membership cards and things like that. But we were like, this is different. This is like special. That was our introduction into specialty coffee. And so he's getting better and better at that. And I'm continuing to lead people to the streets. And I was getting frustrated. I'm like, this is a broken system. We are seeing people leave this life, and then they're coming right back to us, and they're coming back with this really strong message of like, don't try to leave. There's no hope on the other side. Like, this is all that we're good for. And I was like, I recognize that. I remember that voice. I remember thinking to myself, this is my purpose. This is all that I bring to the world. And yeah, and I mean, and meanwhile, on the other side of my life, I had been doing missions trips and going to youth group and stuff like this. And so I was like, no, I know that there's another way forward and that there is hope. And so my husband said, let's start a coffee shop. So we started a coffee shop in Los Angeles in 2020 at the height of COVID in LA, which was bizarre to say the least.
I think y'all just got out of lockdown, didn't you, last week?
Oh my gosh, honestly. But we were like, okay, it'll be okay. You know, they say this thing will pass quickly. And then it quickly became like this battle of how to keep your business going. But thankfully, we were in this little hub of LA where most of the shops were like family owned and operated,
Right.
really small mom and pop shops. And we all kind of just linked arms and were like, we're getting through this. So, yeah, so started that and realized we could hire a couple of survivors in that context.
Mhm.
But knew that we were being called to be a part of addressing a greater issue. And so we reached out to Mike Glanz, who's our current CEO, and asked him if he would help us write a business plan. So when I had hit rock bottom in my life and I went to do that missionary school, Mike was there with his wife and they were doing this missionary school as well. And they just took me under their wing. They showed me how to
Right.
be a human. And so, yeah, they just befriended me and became amazing friends in my life and then continued. I went the nonprofit route, he went the business route. He developed incredibly successful businesses and had an incredible track record with that. Was a donor to our organization and things. So I reached out and I said, hey, I want to see if you'll help us design a business plan because we want to make this scalable. So he asked if I
Mm.
wanted to hire 5 or 10 survivors, and I said I want to hire at least 1,000. So
Right.
uh, he started looking into things and actually got really excited at that point and completely pivoted his life and joined our team. So we
Wow.
went from roasting 300 pounds a month to 10,000 pounds a month overnight with our first acquisition. And
Mm.
today we have 9 cafes across San Diego, multiple roasteries that we've acquired, and have really been proving out the concept in Southern California. What does it look like to be a business model that is highly successful and highly impactful?
Mm.
And that the two are not mutually exclusive, right? You don't have to be a nonprofit to do
Right.
really good work and a business to be super successful. So really doing that. And today we hire survivors first. Every position we have goes to survivors first. We have a coffee training institute in San Diego, and all of those are scholarshiped for survivors. And then we also have a comprehensive care network providing support and resources for survivors as they rebuild their lives.
That is great. That is great. So Talitha started when? When did you start that again? 2020? That was the first.
Yeah, so we did our very first, let's see, my husband started selling bags of coffee on the side in
Okay.
2015. Uh, Fast forward to 2019, we had somebody, a church approach us and say, "Could you do a pop-up stand at a conference we're having in LA? It's like this really big
Mm.
Christian conference." And we're just like go-getters, right? So we're like, of
Right.
course we can. So we went to Home Depot, bought a couple carts, and like literally put together this thing. A good tablecloth can make anything look great.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
we did our first pop-up cart and it was a huge hit. And everybody was like, "Where's your shop? Like, we want to come to this place." And we were like, "We have no shop." So
Mm.
2020, we launched our first shop. And then 2022 is when we partnered with Mike and actually began growing this thing.
Wow. Wow. So you currently have 9 cafes, and they're all in San Diego?
Yeah, so we have
Okay.
we're like a book of brands. We have multiple companies operating under different names. Some of that is to help provide security for survivors. Part of it's also just a growth strategy as a business. But we are just in, let's see, in the net after as of May 12th, we will have 3 Talitha cafes that are branded Talitha in San Diego. And so that's super exciting.
That is great. That is great. What happened to the one in Los Angeles?
It is still running. So
Is it
when
okay?
we first started, Mike is like, we're gonna go full blown wholesale here. That is the
Right.
strategy. And then we're like, maybe, but I think we're going to have shops. And as we began to grow, it became very evident that we needed to keep shops going. So that very first shop, we actually handed off to somebody who was on our team that is just incredible, and a young girl with a dream to go after business and have impactful business. So we said, hey, we want to give you this
Right.
coffee shop. So she's doing that. It's now running in San Diego or in Los Angeles still as an ECO coffee, and she is still getting her beans from us. So still a great partnership there.
That is great. Okay, so let's talk about, some of the survivors. What's your process now? How are you reaching some of these folks, and how? I mean, to be honest, if anybody's listening to this, how can they, and they're in the area, how can they contact you? For this kind of help.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll have you can link my email in this as well, but we've created this comprehensive care network, like I mentioned, called the Talitha Survivor Care Network. So for us, collaboration is so key to what we do, and we really truly believe that we can see an end to trafficking, but it's only going to happen if we all partner up and bring our strengths to the table and work together to see this issue end, and to provide supportive pathways for survivors. So
Right.
in San Diego, we have a really great network of partnerships, nonprofits, businesses. And when we have a position that's available, we actually send it out to that network first. So we send those positions out so they know that there are jobs that are available for the survivors that are in their programs. That actually goes out nationwide,
Oh,
because
wow.
we have local and on-site positions, or sorry, we have local on-site positions, and we have remote positions as well.
Okay.
Part of the reason we're establishing partners across the nation is because we fully intend to be a nationwide coffee company, and we're looking at some of our next marketplaces right now, but we want to have
Right.
the partnerships and relationships in place as we grow. We love to keep things small and market focused on like that small, locally roasted approach. That way, we're having
Wow.
quality and impact on a community level. So, in San Diego specifically, we have a lot of partners that are sending us referrals for survivors that are looking for jobs. And this is everything from like very entry level stuff to our highest levels, like whatever the
Mm.
position is, those are going to be offered to survivors first. Um, like I mentioned, we also have our Coffee Training Institute with it is currently called the San Diego Coffee Training Institute because that is where our hub is.
Right.
As we offer those to survivors, those are scholarship, and part of that is not that they have to have graduated a program to participate in that. They can actually be still in their program, looking to build confidence, looking to build skills,
Right.
and really, get their start. Maybe they're just starting off on their resume and that type of thing. But we are, also helping build resumes and, get them on their feet. When a survivor comes to work with us, they go through 4 phases. So that beginning phase is, what does it look like to show up to work, to show up on
Right.
time, to
Right.
take
Exactly.
care of the tasks that are at hand and all of these things. And then what does it look like to move into initiative, to actually take more
Mm.
initiative and, see what needs to be done and kind of take on those tasks on your own. And then moving on into leadership, looking at what does it look like to participate in raising up your voice and contributing to the team, and then launching out is the final step, either into the company through career pathing or out of the company into your next goals. We don't see Talitha as the final step, so we
Right.
truly want this to be a place where survivors can begin to find their feet in the work environment
Hmm.
and kind of discover what they're passionate about. We've had single mamas come to us that barely know how to work a computer, and now
Right.
they're pursuing university and having dreams of, doing incredible things with their lives. We have people who have gone on into the nonprofit world and are highly successful in leadership in the
Right.
nonprofit world. So many different dynamics come our way, and we really just want to be committed to meeting each individual wherever they are in their journey. I think one of the things I love most about what we're doing is that when our survivor staff come and they join our team, they don't feel like a special project. I
Right.
think
That's
for me,
good.
I think that's so important. I talk to a lot of people who are interested in hiring survivors, and they say, we're hitting these blockers, or maybe we can't get anybody to launch out of our program and things like that. And I think the key to that, really, not that we've fully figured it out, but I really believe that it is empowerment.
Hmm.
And that when people feel confident and they feel like they're a part of something, it's actually inspiring. So when you
Right.
talk to our survivor staff, they'll tell you that they're part of Talitha, which is a company that is bringing hope to survivors, and they feel like they are a part of that mission.
That's
And it
great.
gives permission to dream, and to fully
Right.
step into who they are and what's on their lives.
That's great. So currently, do you have aftercare, or are you a part of that process, or have you already partnered with people who are kind of maybe giving that aftercare, or do most of your the next question is it men and women, or just mostly women that come to your help? And so are you orchestrating any care whatsoever, or are you just kind of partner with people that are doing that?
Yeah, so we are so our role is really like the job training, the
Okay.
on-site training,
Yeah.
the providing employment, giving that opportunity, coffee
Right.
training, that type of thing. And then we're bringing in partners for the other side of things. And so that is, intentionally looking for people who are providing therapy, support groups, legal services, all of these things so that we can provide those referrals. And I think we've seen just incredible ways that that network has snapped into place.
That's
We've
great.
connected survivors with educational opportunities. We have connected survivors with scholarships and things like legal services. Sometimes somebody's like, I have a lot of content online and I don't know how to get it off and I don't know what to
Right.
do. And so we'll connect them with an organization that is the battle they are fighting. And
That's
that's just
great.
been a really incredible thing. And housing as well. We've had scenarios where, survivors that are employed by us will enter into some point of crisis, whether it's, emotional crisis or a housing crisis or things like that. And it's been
Mm,
awesome to just watch our network of partnerships really snap into gear and kind of come around those individuals and offer services as needed.
that's great. That is great. So I love what you said a while ago is that that Talitha is more of a stepping stone for these folks. That's probably what is killing the restaurant industry right now is that people when I was growing up, I was in the restaurant business most of my life, and that was the stepping stone for a teenager to just get job experience
Yeah.
and then go to the next level. And unfortunately, what's happening now is, adults are trying to make it a career,
Yeah.
by, standing behind a counter, just taking an order. And I like what you said that, you're really encouraging these folks to come in and be, learn the skills that you need and then move on. Whether it's through education or, potentially moving up in the company or even moving up for another company. So I think that's encouraging because, one, you, as a company, you can't afford to have, a career out of somebody just taking orders, or doing inventory and all of that. And I like how you said it's just a stepping stone to where they're going to go next.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, we will see some of these individuals grow into more leadership. We have people
Hmm.
who say, yeah, I want to learn the roasting side, or I would love to learn more of
Right.
the operation side and things like that. But that will not be the majority. that for
Right.
most it will be that kind of launching pad. And I think it's also just a safe place to dream. You know, when you
Yes.
have stability and security in your life, you can do things like set goals. But if you don't have stability in your life, and then somebody says, "Where would you like to be in 5 years?" You're like, "I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to be tomorrow." And so,
Right.
you know, we
Yeah.
really want to create that security in that place where they can actually picture what do I want my life to look like.
Right. Exactly. That is great. So, do you deal typically with women, or is
Yeah,
there
so
men sometime as well?
it's not exclusively women. Like we never set out and said we're going to be, you know, a company that employs women. We
Hmm.
say survivors. I If you look at the majority of women who are being trafficked for the purpose of sex, it is women. And so a lot
Right.
of people that come our way are women. But we are not opposed to hiring men who are survivors as well.
Right. That's great. I tell the story all the time. I was molested by my baseball coach, when I was 11 years old, and 10 or 11, I think. I can't remember. And for years I had no avenue or no out. One, because I thought, maybe I had done something wrong. Even though my parents, I finally told my parents when I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, and they took him to court and he went to jail and all that kind of stuff. So because I happened to find out with a couple of other buddies of mine that it had happened to them as well. We were at a sleepover and just, I don't even know how the conversation come up. And all of a sudden it was like, me too. And then me too. And then me too. And, the
Yeah.
next thing you know, it just kind of went from there. But I spent, gosh, 20 years dreaming of how I was going to kill this guy when he got out of jail. Just I had it planned. I joined the military. I became an expert marksman.
Wow.
I knew when he was getting out of jail. I knew where he was in jail. I knew, I was going to sit out about 300 or 400 yards and, just
Wow.
wait for him to step out of the jail. And like I had this whole thing planned in my head because, I never had an avenue to be able to talk about it, as a man. And then I gave my life to the Lord in 2003, and it was about 2005, 2006. I was discipling this guy, and he was a complete drunk. And, I kept, he would do well for a few weeks, and then he would fall off the wagon, do well for a week. And so, anyway, I met with him one day. I got a call from the police, and they said, "Hey, you need to come get this guy. He says you're his pastor." And so I go pick him up, and I get him, and we're in the car driving down somewhere, and all of a sudden he headbutts me in the side of the head, while I'm driving. And we were at a four-way stop, rush hour traffic in the little town that I live in. And next thing
Wow.
I know, all I remember was helping him pick his teeth up out of the street. I kind of
Oh,
just blacked out, and I drug him out of the car, and I just beat him to death. And so getting back in the car, I take him home, throw him out in the yard, and just drive off. And so I called my elders and, told them what was happening. I'm at the church just waiting for them to come fire me because I figured it's going to be
yeah.
all over the news. It's going to be on TV or something like that because it was right in the middle of a. But I'll never forget. I'm at the church. I'm by myself. The sanctuary's dark. I'm sitting on the steps of the altar. I was like, God, why? I said, you help me quit drinking. You help me quit smoking. You help me quit doing drugs. You help me quit doing pornography. All these things, these outward things that were just going away just like that as I gave my life to the Lord. And finally, he says, you're going to have to forgive him. Like it was just like this, you need to forgive him. And I was like, well, I just beat him up. I don't have to forgive him. And he's like, no, that's not who I'm talking about. And it
Wow.
was just like
Wow.
this overwhelming feeling. And I just broke down. I just started bawling. I said, I forgive him. And I just kind of just lost, just everything just kind of fell off of me. And I'd been stuffing this anger down for so long. And finally, about less than, I'm not kidding, less than 2 months, he gets out of jail. And I mean, I think even at that time, I still was going to kill him. And I had two kids at the time. And, it
Wow.
was
Yeah.
just kind of like all of a sudden, you just kind of see God working and all of that. But I say all that to say is that I spent 20 plus years just really, living with that because I didn't have an avenue really to speak of that I felt like I could go and somebody would understand what I was going through or hear that. And so when I hear something like, what you guys are doing and what you're giving people that opportunity, even if they come and just still don't have it all worked out, it seems like there's an avenue for them just to be able to express that, and then obviously you've got the helps to come alongside of that, and so that's just such a blessing to those who are struggling
Yeah,
with that.
yeah. It's just, it's such, I think in both of our lives, it's so evident, right? I think a lot of times
Hmm.
people don't realize how much unforgiveness actually enslaves
Oh
you.
yeah, yeah.
And I think for me, I didn't want to be slave to anyone. I
Amen.
wanted
Right,
to find
exactly.
full freedom in my life. And I actually remember the Lord challenging me and asking me, what is my justice? And I was
Mm.
like, I don't know. I'm not you. I don't get what you're doing. I don't
Yeah.
understand why I am standing here before you with a relationship with you when I've done some terrible things in my life.
Right.
And yeah, and he was like, "Don't you think that my justice would be everybody being reconciled to me?"
Mm.
And began to lead me through that journey of like, what does it look like? What if, your father, who was the first person who ever hurt you, what if he actually encountered me?
Mm.
What if he actually had full restoration in his life and experienced my love? What would you say to that? And,
Mm.
started bringing me through this journey. And I think a lot of times people are like, I hear people wrestling with forgiveness, and I'm
Right.
like, man, but if the Lord can forgive me, and then who else? Who else is
Right,
out there?
exactly. Yeah.
I think it's just this thing of like the moment that I chose to forgive and say, you know what, I'm releasing this person, and now it's between you and God. Like now
Right.
you guys can
Yeah.
work that out, you can wrestle that out. And all I know is that my heart is free to heal, and that you have no power over me anymore. And I
Right.
think that that's actually one of the most empowering things.
It is. I always tell people unforgiveness is like drinking acid and hoping the other person dies.
Right, right. Yeah,
It's
it's
like
so true.
it,
So true.
you're the only you spend hours
Yeah,
upon hours and years upon years of dwelling on this, and that person probably hadn't thought twice about you the whole time. It's just kind of and yet we ruin our lives over that kind of unforgiveness, and it's not for the other person. That's what I keep trying to tell her. It's not for the other person. It is for you. Like, and I'm not saying if you have an opportunity to tell somebody that you forgive them, but most of the time it's just us saying, God, I forgive them. Now heal me and
right,
let me work through
right.
this.
Yeah, and I've
Yeah.
had those moments where I tell somebody like I've forgiven you, right? And they're
Right.
like, "Oh, thank you so much. Like I needed that." And it brings this healing and restoration into their life. I've told people I forgive them and they're like, "For what?"
Yeah,
Like
right.
why? What
Exactly.
do you have to forgive me for? Like, or you know what? Actually, I'm upset with you, and you're like, "I still forgive you."
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's great. Well, Jenny, you guys have a great product. So I'll talk about the product now. I've had the opportunity. I think I'm going through at least, gosh, between me and my wife, the samples that you guys sent, and my wife is buying it now. The coffee is amazing. I mean, we've probably gone through probably 8 pounds. Just
Amazing.
between, and we're the only two that drinks the coffee at our house. So,
Yeah, I
um,
understand that on a deep level.
yeah, and it is good, good coffee. Oh my goodness. And I'm a coffee snob, so
Yeah.
I appreciate what you guys are doing. So it's not, a lot of times companies will either try to give a product out and, have a ministry behind it, and one of them flourishes and the other one doesn't necessarily, or, they'll have a ministry and try to throw a product out and the product's not as great as the ministry is, and it just it never works. But I think that you guys kind of have something a little special here that the business model that you have, having survivors come into place of employees and the help there, you're giving them something to buy into, and a hope that they haven't had in a long time. And on top of that, you have a really, really good quality product. And I think that's going to take you long, long way as far into the future, as far as a business goes. So for the
Thank you.
audience that's listening, I can't tell you how good the coffee really is. We've been buying the whole bean and, grinding it up ourselves at home and just going through it like crazy. And we're actually getting ready. I'm in the process of redoing our coffee area for our church, and we are getting ready to bring in your coffee as well at our church. So we're really
Exciting.
excited about that.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
awesome.
great.
Yeah,
So what do you?
I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that
go ahead.
we're able to. I think one thing that was really important for us was to create a high quality product. I think
Yeah,
we wanted, on the business side, the business strategy, you want to provide something that people want to buy, right? And so there was that whole
right.
side of things, like what does it look like to have an excellent product that can actually compete in the market? But I also wanted to create something that survivors could be really proud of, that they could be
That's
really
great.
proud of being a part of our company and knowing that we're putting out an exceptional product.
That's great. So what do you have in store for the future? What's something that you can let us in on that's coming up, or maybe vision or ideas or anything like that that you've got going on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say I'm a dreamer. And I think that's pretty evident.
That's what my
But
wife says about me too. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I'm never short of vision, but we are absolutely still pursuing our goal of being on a mission to hire 1,000 survivors. And
Mm,
I really, through our Talitha Survivor Care Network, I believe that we are on our way to bringing impact to about 20,000 survivors. In the first few months, we rolled out our very first survey with that Survivor Care Network. We're like, let's see how many hundreds of people that have been impacted through this Talitha Survivor Care Network. And it was about 4,000 in the first few
praise
months of
God.
forming the team. So we're like, we are on track. So that's
That's
been
great.
incredible. Like I said, we're really proving out this concept in San Diego. What does it look like to build a really sustainable model? Because you want to bring survivors into something that is stable and secure.
Right.
And so that was the very first mission. So we have been doing that really well. It's been really exciting. The people who have come
Mm,
and joined our team, my mind is always blown. We have people who are just experts in their field coming to be a part of the
wow.
team and bring what they do to the table because they want to do something that's impactful. And so that's been incredible. We're actually beginning to look. We have multiple letters being sent out across the country, beginning to look for our next marketplace, and partnering with coffee shops and coffee roasteries who want to be a part of this movement. And we are, expanding that Talitha Survivor Care Network to make sure that more survivors are
Mm,
being impacted and support's being offered to them. And really also growing the Coffee Training Institute.
that's
We
great.
have such an exceptional program there, with training wholesales and bakeries and
Mm,
cafes and even other coffee shops in how to be incredible in the coffee field and in the coffee world. So our Coffee Training Institute is growing and having opportunities. But again, that is also, there's the impact side, and that has
mm,
been growing so much as well. We have law enforcement, we have youth, at-risk youth programs coming to us and asking for training and things like that.
mm.
So I feel like in such a natural and organic way, our impact is spreading even beyond what we thought it would, which has just
Right.
been really exciting. So yeah, we're on track to become the next nationwide coffee brand.
I love it. I want the first right of refusal for the Missouri area. If you
Yes,
can,
absolutely. Stay in
I
touch
would
for
jump all over that.
sure.
That's great.
Yes, that's
That is
amazing.
great. Well, awesome. Well, Jenny, this has been such a pleasure. I love hearing your story. I love watching the restoration that God has done in your life that, brings you a place to hope and not bitterness. and that you've taken that hope that you have in your own life and poured it into your children and your family, and then you're passing that on to people who have gone through what you've gone through. And we always know that God uses whatever happens in our lives bad. He always turns it into good, and you're doing an amazing job with with the situation that you were in. You could have gone one of two ways, and you went the way of the Lord, and you stopped the generational curse that was happening in your life, and now you're raising godly children that will impact the future of the kingdom as well. And so we really thank you for that and listening to the leading of the Lord. And we'll be praying for you and just great success, and looking to partner. As we partner together, I'm looking for great things as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we're so excited to create opportunities for people to make a difference and, do that in really tangible and simple ways.
That's great. Well, God bless you, and I will. We'll obviously stay in touch because we are going to partner together. Just so you guys know, Talitha will become a sponsor for the podcast, and we're going to be promoting them as much as possible. I'm going to be drinking it quite often on the on the podcast as well, and we're looking forward to it. So God bless you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. God bless.
You've been listening to the Man Up God's Way podcast. Visit us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and our website at manupgodsway.org.